Former high school freshman of the year and top-ranked player in the state of California received an offer from the Zags as Mark Few continues to cast a wide net out on the recruiting trail.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Randy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Lots of different stuff to get to today. Jeremy Jones signed with a new team, sort of a new team, a familiar team for Mr. Jones. We'll talk about that. The Pac-12 is going to host 18 varsity sports. We're going to discuss what that means for Gonzaga because not every team is making the trip to the so-called Conference of Champions. A former Zag finally got called up to the big leagues. We're going to talk about all of that and more. But first, we break down another new target for Mark Few and the Zags on the recruiting trail, as last week Gonzaga made an offer to a 4-star wing in the 2027 recruiting class in Gene Robuck. Gene Robuck is a 6'5" wing from La Mirada High School in California. He is the 41st ranked player nationally in that 2027 class. That's according to 247 Sports. They have him as the 13th ranked small forward in the class and currently the number 1 ranked player in the state of California. The composite rankings are even more generous to Roebuck. They have him 33rd in the class overall, and that's because On3/Rivals has him a little higher at 38th, although they list him as a shooting guard and not a small forward. They also only have him as the 3rd player in California, so despite having him higher in their rankings, they actually have him lower than 2 of his peers in the state of California in that class. And then ESPN really bringing up the composite rankings as they actually have him currently 13th in the 2027 class. I know there are a lot of folks out there that are very adamant that ESPN and Paul Biancardi do a phenomenal job and are arguably the best. So we're going to roll with that as they are ranking this player Roebuck here just inside the top 15 in that 2027 class. The caveat here being that class rankings for upcoming classes like 2026 are relatively accurate as these rankings tend to get. Whereas when you get a year or two or further removed, they just fluctuate so much. You'll see guys who were not in the top 100 end up finishing in the top 20. You'll see guys who are in the top 20 or top 30 or even top 15 who end up outside the top 50 because turns out growth is not linear for everybody, and guys who are the best high school players in the country as freshmen don't always end up being anywhere close to the top high school player by the time they're seniors. It's just how it goes when you're trying to evaluate the talent levels of 14 to 17-year-olds. But obviously there's a lot to like here about Roebuck, and he is being valued by so many different programs outside of just Gonzaga. He was named the Max Preps Freshman of the Year after his freshman season, and he has a ton of offers already. Kansas, who seems to offer just about everybody. So I think, we don't always know how much that means that Kansas is interested, but they have made an offer here to Roebuck. Also offers from some of the big-time local programs, USC and UCLA have both made offers. UCLA seems pretty invested here, have done a lot of visiting, have talked to him multiple times out on this recruiting trail. UW, Cal, Arizona State also have offers if you're looking at the former Pac-12, which has a whole bunch of schools interested in Roebuck's services here. Also, moving into the Big 12, Cincinnati and TCU have both made offers, and at the mid-major level, UNLV and their new coach, Josh Pastner, South Florida and San Francisco, both of the USFs have made offers to Roebuck, and then Cal State Fullerton and Cal State Northridge have both made offers as well. There's also a report on Twitter about a month ago in mid-June when the contact period finally opened for the 2027 class. So that's when you were allowed as a coach to directly contact a player in that class. Roebuck reported on Twitter that the schools that contacted him shortly after that recruiting deadline opened up were BYU, Utah, Marquette, Texas, Illinois, New Mexico State, Clemson, and Ohio State. That's in addition to the schools that have already made an offer. All that to say, Gene Robuck is a hot commodity right now on the recruiting trail. He has indicated in interviews with 247 Sports that he is not in a hurry to make a decision. We already talked about that a little bit earlier this week with 2026 prospects who are very much taking their time on the recruiting trail. We're not seeing a lot of early commitments. We're not seeing a lot of even early lists. We're not even seeing a lot of visits comparatively to previous classes in 2026, in part due to the timing of the House settlement and the fact that I think these players in 26 saw their counterparts a year older get big money promised to them or given to them in the NIL era, when you could just promise huge amounts of money to those players. And so these 2026 guys are trying to make sure they do the best they can to get their bag. And that's not happening as easily, with teams still trying to figure out what the House settlement means for them financially and how much money they can commit to future years. So I think that's why we've seen the 2026 class in particular be more slow moving than we're used to with other high school recruiting classes. And I wouldn't be surprised to see very few 2027 players making early commitments due to the same reasons. Scouting report on Gene Robuck. He is a very high level scorer. He is a volume scorer. This is a dude who wants the ball in his hands, who wants to score in a hurry. He wants to score a lot. He wants to score often. He wants to take a lot of shots. When teams have schemed against him, and again, we're talking about a very young high school player, so he has very limited experience with teams that are scheming against him and scouting against him and kind of making their game plan about stopping him. So when that has happened, he has struggled. I don't think that this is a shock, nor is it really even a concern necessarily. It's more a matter of how does he respond to that happening. He is a high volume scorer, but he can settle for bad shots. When he is he's the focal point of his high school team. So certainly when he's the best player on the floor, sometimes you get forced into taking bad shots. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does merit the question of, can he make an adjustment when he's on a team where he's not necessarily asked to do that? And, certainly Gonzaga or many of these other programs on this list would not be asking him to be in a role, where he's going to be taking a lot of tough shots. So you want to make sure that he can adjust to more of an off-ball role, or more of a role where he's not necessarily a high volume scorer. And if that's what he wants to be, there are likely programs that would give him that role. That's just going to be more in the Fullerton, CSUN, maybe even South Florida or San Francisco type vein, not as much the power conference programs, which are probably not going to ask him to do that. He was described by Tracy Pearson of 247 Sports, who covers UCLA, as having a quick release and consistent shot similar to Johnny Juzang. Thought I would toss that in there. Obviously, Johnny Juzang, a name familiar to Gonzaga fans, as he played at UCLA for many years and was on that team that Gonzaga beat thanks to the Jalen Suggs bank shot in the Final Four of the NCAA tournament in 2021. And Pearson also notes that Roebuck is better off the dribble than Juzang. So this is, again, Juzang was a phenomenal scorer in high school and in college, and has been a good scorer in the G League as well. So that's a pretty high praise for a player who's as young as Roebuck is at this time. Obviously still developing, but also a key thing for Gonzaga. We've talked about this a few times in looking at their recruiting targets, whether it's Tyron Stokes, the top player in the 2026 class, whether it's Baba Oladotun, who's the top player in the 2027 class. But Gonzaga's looking at athletic wings, high scoring threes. And it's not that Gonzaga hasn't had these players in the past. Julian Strother is a very notable, very recent example. Caleb Battle is an also notable and even more recent example. They did not recruit him out of high school, obviously, but those are the types of players that I think we've seen Gonzaga go after more and more. It used to be, pass first point guards, and, you wanted to get your dominant low post scoring bigs. You wanted to stretch four, and then you wanted your wings to be, good defensive players, decent role players, maybe floor spacers. You weren't necessarily looking for a ton of scoring out of your wings. Obviously, there are examples, counterexamples. Adam Morrison clearly was the best scorer on Gonzaga's team, but in the last 15 years or so, it's only been very recently that we've seen Gonzaga really go after more score first players on the perimeter, on the wing, in the vein of Battle or Strother, or now Tyon Grant Foster as well. And so it seems like we are seeing more movement for Gonzaga in that space on the recruiting trail. And Roebuck certainly fits into that kind of category for Gonzaga's recruiting pursuits. He's the fourth known target for the Zags in the 2027 class, joining Baba Olatunji, who we mentioned earlier, the number one player in the class, who is expected to visit Gonzaga in October, potentially for craziness in the kennel with Sam Funches. He's a 6'9" forward from Maryland, again, top player in the class. They're also pursuing Jalen Davis, who is from Bremerton, Washington, the 34th ranked player in the 2027 class and the top ranked player in the state of Washington, whose father, Mia Davis, played at Pacific back when Pacific was in the Big West. The Zags have also contacted Dooney Johnson, a 6'5" wing from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, although they have not, at least publicly, made him a scholarship offer yet. But it's still Gonzaga so invested in the 2026 recruiting class with a ton of names there, and now continuing to get their feet wet in the 2027 class as well, with offers now out to the top ranked player in both the state of California and the state of Washington in that class. Well, folks, we're going to pivot here. The Pac-12's planning to sponsor 18 sports when the conference restarts in the 26-27 season. What does that mean for Gonzaga? Well, some of their teams, they're not going to be making that move. So we're going to talk about what that means for them coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, it's time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick and energizing shot. So whether you're sinking birdies or just out making memories with your friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. And let's be honest, some days on the course or off the course, you just need that little extra boost to stay sharp and stay energized. And golf is all about having good times with good people and good flavors, of course. The grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best part of your clubhouse go-to without having to chase down the beverage cart. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This order offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders, whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36. Get the energizing boost that you need to power through. Order transfusion flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, moving away from our recruiting conversation, which has dominated the headlines the last week plus here on Locked On Zags, to instead talk about conference realignment. There hasn't been a lot of news here in the month of July. In late June, we obviously got word that the Pac-12 was going to add Texas State in the 26-27 season, giving them the full number of football-sponsored members that they needed. We'd heard previously to that CBS was going to be the flagship media partner of the Pac-12, but we have not heard the rest of that media deal, which we're expecting to include the CW. It could include some Warner Brothers Discovery, maybe a streaming service, but we haven't heard any update on that. We have not heard many other updates on the Pac-12 and realignment right now, other than they are continuing to go through mediation with the Mountain West Conference, which is expected to be done in early September. But John Canzano, who's covering the Pac-12 diligently on his website, The Bald-Faced Truth, has indicated that the Pac-12 is planning to sponsor 18 sports once they get started in the 26-27 season. None of this is a real shock. It's kind of what we would have expected, but now that we've seen that in writing somewhere, I wanted to kind of talk about what it means for Gonzaga specifically. Obviously, you know, we know men's basketball and women's basketball are going to be in there. We know they're moving to the Pac-12. That's the reason Gonzaga's in the conference. That's the primary thing that we're going to talk about here. But Gonzaga is moving all of their sports into the Pac-12, or at least all of the ones that they can. And so it's relevant to them which sports are going to be sponsored by this conference. There are 8 sports on the men's side and 10 sports on the women's side that will be sponsored by the Pac-12. On the men's side, you have football, basketball, baseball, track and field, tennis, cross country, wrestling, and golf. On the women's side, you have basketball, volleyball, soccer, gymnastics, track and field, tennis, cross country, softball, golf, swimming, and diving. More athletes on the women's side to counteract the massive amounts of athletes on the men's side. This is a Title IX thing. It's not something that Gonzaga has really experienced, this imbalance, but most conferences, most schools that are in conferences that have football tend to have more sponsored women's sports than men's sports because of the just size of football and how many student athletes it ends up taking up. So this isn't a shock to see more women's sports and sports that are sponsored on the women's side, but not on the men's side. The most notable of those being soccer. And Gonzaga is a team, like many, that has sponsored both men's and women's soccer for as long as we can really realistically remember. And now when the move happens to the Pac-12, Gonzaga's men's soccer team is not going to go with it. Gonzaga also sponsors both men's and women's rowing, and rowing will not be a sponsored sport in the Pac-12 as well. So there are 3 Gonzaga sports that are not going to make the move to the Pac-12. There are also some sports that the Pac-12 will sponsor that Gonzaga does not have. Softball is probably the most notable, wrestling on the men's side as well, but swimming and diving also as well. But again, not as relevant to Gonzaga. More relevant is what's going to happen to these 3 teams that are not making their move to the Pac-12. My assumption for the men's and women's rowing is that they will stay in the WCC. I don't see any reason why Stu Jackson, the commissioner of the WCC, would rankle about a small Olympic sport, a non-revenue generating sport like rowing. I don't think there's going to be any pushback on Gonzaga keeping their rowing sports in the WCC. I think that's very likely what's going to happen. Men's soccer is a slightly more interesting conversation. I do think ultimately that the WCC wouldn't refute Gonzaga's men's soccer program from staying in the conference. Like, I don't think that they would say, no, you have to find a new home for them. Like, that would be incredibly petty and frankly would just make them look bad. If a news story came out that said, oh, the WCC is refusing to keep Gonzaga's men's soccer program because they're mad about their move to the Pac-12, like that would just make that wouldn't make Gonzaga look bad. That would make the WCC look bad. They're smart enough to recognize that. So I think ultimately, if Gonzaga wants to keep their men's soccer program in the WCC, they're keeping their men's soccer program in the WCC. But it's also interesting because Oregon State and Washington State have both played last season and will play this upcoming season in the WCC for men's soccer as well. So will they stick it out and stay in the WCC? The West Coast Conference would love that. They would love to keep both Oregon State and Washington State men's soccer. Oregon State in particular is a very good men's soccer team. They're really good. This would be a huge coup for the WCC to keep a very valuable program to, former high major programs. To be able to keep them and keep Gonzaga in that conference would be a huge win for them. So I think they would love that. But I think there's a chance that Oregon State's going to look for something else. Whether that's trying to get an affiliate membership in a power conference like the Big 10 or the Big 12, whether that's trying to, I doubt they would go independent, but trying to form a new, I don't know exactly what it might look like, but it is something that is worth keeping an eye on of whether the WCC tries to keep those 3 programs in-house, whether they try to kick them out. It's an interesting wrinkle that doesn't get a lot of press. It doesn't get a lot of attention because frankly, there's not a lot of people focusing on the men's soccer impact on conference realignment. But in this case, it's fairly significant and one to keep an eye on for Gonzaga and for the rest of the Pac-12. Another thing that Canzano noted in his article was that baseball, which will be sponsored by the Pac-12, but they don't have a lot of baseball teams. Boise State doesn't sponsor baseball. I think Utah State doesn't sponsor baseball. I'm not sure if Colorado State sponsors baseball, but regardless, they're going to be tight on baseball. And I think they may look for affiliate memberships in baseball. Whether that's St. Mary's, which could just end up getting a full invite into the conference the way Gonzaga did, or if not, they could just invite St. Mary's baseball. They could go after Portland baseball and pull them out of the WCC. Maybe they go after Grand Canyon, something like that. But Canzano said, I'm just going to read a direct quote from his article. He said, quote, one WCC athletic director I spoke with told me that he believes the play for baseball is to have all of the Division I conferences in the Pacific time zone join together in a super league with the relegation system. That is unique. I have no idea if this particular WCC AD is just coming up with this idea, if it's something that's been kicked around, if it has some serious legs, if it's completely fabricated. I don't know. What I know is what I said in the quote from Canzano's article. But this would be the Pac-12, the Mountain West, the WCC, and the Big West. There's some really good baseball in those conferences. The Big West, Irvine, Long Beach State, Cal Poly have all made major moves in the last half decade plus. Like, there's some really good baseball in that conference. Obviously, the Pac-12, Oregon State is a tremendous program. Wazoo's not great, but has had some history in the past. Fresno State had Aaron Judge less than a decade ago. So there's some real talent in these conferences, and a big, huge conference with all of them together, and a relegation promotion system, which again would be more like EuroLeague soccer, where you'd have, let's say there's 22 combined teams out of these conferences. It's more than that. Let's say it's 34. 17 of them make it to the top, 17 of them are in the second tier. So it would basically be like the Pac West 1, Pac West 2. And those would be your two conferences. I don't know. It could work. I think we're a ways away from that. But I do think ultimately, eventually, programs that Olympic sports that are not football, men's basketball, women's basketball will eventually start forming their own conferences outside of what the football conferences are like. If Oregon wants to play in the Big Ten, great. If Stanford and Cal want to play North Carolina in the ACC, great. If eventually it's just all the SEC and the Big Ten and there's 40 teams in each conference, fine. The other sports should not be beholden to this. Stanford's baseball team should not have to go play at Virginia. It just does not make any sense, and it's killing them. Stanford baseball cannot recruit the same way they used to be able to recruit because people do not want to go play in a team. They want to play in California. They want to play for Stanford and play at Oregon State and at Arizona. They don't want to play at Boston College. Like they don't want to do that. So it's costing them in women's basketball. Like these sports are getting really hammered by this. And I think a change in this space could be really valuable for those programs to continue to survive. How soon this happens? Probably not super soon. But I do think that there is going to eventually be strong movement towards keeping the non-Olympic or the non-revenue generating sports more geographically aligned, and maybe things like this where they all combine into one conference and do a relegation system. Maybe that's going to eventually be the answer here. Since we're talking baseball, a couple more very quick things before we move on. Former Gonzaga outfielder Troy Johnston was finally recalled by the Miami Marlins. I thought he was going to get called up 3 years ago when he was having a monster season in AAA. It took until Monday, July 28th was when he finally got the call to be promoted to the Miami Marlins. He will be 28 years old when he makes his major league debut. He played at Gonzaga from 2017 to 2019, hit .330 with 10 home runs as a junior in that 2019 season before he was drafted in the 17th round by the Marlins. Spent 4 years and nearly 300 games at AAA before finally getting that call this year with Jacksonville, the AAA affiliate of the Marlins. He has hit .252 with 12 home runs and 31 stolen bases in about a half a season. Nice to see him finally getting that call. When he does make his debut, he will be the 30th player from Gonzaga to make a major league appearance. Very excited for Johnston. Good for him. And then the sad news to end it here. Speaking of baseball, not exactly Gonzaga related, but Spokane native legend Ryne Sandberg passed away from cancer at age 65. He was a longtime second baseman for the Chicago Cubs. He also started at North Central High School in Spokane in the mid-1970s before he was drafted in 1978, made his major league debut in 1981, and again had a prolific career with the Chicago Cubs. He was a star athlete in the city of Spokane around the same time as Mark Brunell, who went on to a prolific NFL career as a quarterback and won a Super Bowl, as well as John Stockton, who of course went to Gonzaga and then went on to have a prolific career in the NBA as one of the greatest passers and point guards in the sport's history. And so at one point, Spokane had a Hall of Fame second baseman in Ryne Sandberg, a Hall of Fame point guard in John Stockton, and an elite NFL quarterback in Mark Brunell, all around the same time. And that's pretty cool, even if only one of them was Gonzaga affiliated. Really sad to see Sandberg pass away. He was a truly tremendous human and a huge part of Spokane's history, sports history, baseball history in particular. So sad to see him no longer with us. Well, folks, closing out the show, Drew Timme quickly corrected a teammate who he believed disrespected a Gonzaga legend. We're going to talk to you about what happened there coming up in just a second. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our conversation here about a hodgepodge of various Gonzaga topics. We got 3 more quick things to get to. We're actually going to start talking about Jeremy Jones. Former Gonzaga forward Jeremy Jones, who just finished up his first ever NBA Summer League, this time with the Memphis Grizzlies, has now signed a deal to return to Japan to play for the Nagoya Fighting Eagles in Japan. He spent 3 years with this club previously before he came back to the United States last season to play for the Rio Grande Valley Vipers in the G League. It was his first full season in the G League. He played 50 games last year for the Vipers, averaged 5 points, 3 boards, and about 20 minutes per game. He was in the States while his wife Former Gonzaga forward Ellie Tinkle, who is also the daughter of Oregon State basketball coach Wayne Tinkle, was pregnant. Ellie has since given birth to their first child. And now, after being in the United States and getting the chance to play in the G League and getting a chance to compete in Summer League, Jones is going to return to Japan to go play for this Nagoya club. Again, he spent 3 years with the Eagles, averaged about 12.5 points and 6 boards in 170 games across those 3 seasons. He was a fan favorite in Japan, and he was actually teammates for a while with his former Gonzaga teammate, Jonathan Williams. It was cool to see those two guys playing together, not only in the same league, but on the same team over in Japan. That was a cool thing when that happened a few years ago. And again, Jones just wrapped up his first NBA Summer League, played 5 games with Memphis, 14 minutes a game, averaged about 3.5 points, 2 boards. Very excited for Jeremy. This is really cool to continue his professional career, to have gotten an opportunity to come home and be around his family, be around his friends, be, of course, around his wife and now child, and now getting an opportunity to go make more money and play for a club that loves him, that adored him when he was there. Now he gets a chance to come back and do it all again. Very excited for Jeremy. Very happy for him. Next up, I talked about this in the teaser there. Drew Timme called out a teammate over their Ronny Turiaf take on a recent video. This is just a funny little thing that the Brooklyn Nets posted, one of the social media things that we've kind of seen going around, where the social media manager was asking players after practice to name a random athlete. That was it. There was no parameters on their random athlete naming. And when Drew Timme was asked about it, he had paused. And while he paused, one of his other teammates, Tyson Etienne, said Ronny Turiaf. And Drew was a little rankled by this. He did not like the idea of Ronny Turiaf being described as a random athlete. He responded and he was like, that's a Gonzaga legend. He's a Zag legend. And Etienne said, oh, I didn't know Ronny went to Gonzaga. And I'm not even lying to you, folks. I thought the video froze, but it was just Drew just ice cold staring at Tyson. He was not happy to find out that he didn't know where Ronny Turiaf went to college. It's possible Etienne was messing with him and did mention him because he knew that. But if not, Drew did not like that. He had some icy stares about that. And even at the very end of the video, as he walked out of the room, he said something about Ronny Turiaf's not random. Like he was still a little rankled about it. I love that. This is why we love Drew for so many reasons. This is why we love Drew. This is the kind of person that he is. He knows his Gonzaga history. He's not afraid to call it out. He will defend other Gonzaga players. He will talk about Gonzaga players in any capacity, in any situation that he can. It's so easy to root for Drew. It's so easy to love Drew. And this was just a fun, goofy video that the Brooklyn Nets posted, but another reminder of why it's great that he is one of the real faces of this Gonzaga basketball program over the last half decade or so. Last but not least, did not get to this on Tuesday's episode or Monday's episode, but wanted to mention it here to close out the show. Monday, July 28th was officially Chet Holmgren Day in Oklahoma City, part of a 3-day event the Oklahoma City mayor has put on in response to, of course, the Thunder winning their first championship as the Oklahoma City Thunder. Of course, the franchise won as the Seattle Supersonics back in the late 70s. Chet Holmgren Day was July 28th, Jalen Williams Day, July 29th, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander Day, as many of you are listening to this on Wednesday, July 30th. Those 3 days to honor the 3 superstars for this Oklahoma City team that, of course, beat Andrew Nembhard and the Indiana Pacers in 7 games in the NBA Finals back in June. All announced by the city mayor. The mayor then was kind of talking about all 3 of these players on social media throughout the day. Very cool to see that. Obviously, it's a performative type of event, but still a cool thing for Chet to be recognized as one of the pillars of this team in this championship for this Oklahoma City club. Chet averaged 15 points and 8 boards in 32 regular season games last year, upped his numbers a little bit in the playoffs across 23 playoff games, averaged 15.2 points, 8.7 boards, about 2 blocks, was absolutely fantastic, had 5 blocks in the game in the finals, had some really big performances, went through a gauntlet in the Western Conference where he went up against Rudy Gobert, went up against Jaren Jackson Jr., went up against Nikola Jokic, just had his hands full with some of the best offensive and defensive bigs in the entire world, and made himself incredibly valuable by helping to get this team to the finals, and of course winning that championship. Very cool to see that for Chet. That's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much To those of you who have made the show your first listen or your first watch of the day, of course, want to give a special shout out to those everyday listeners, those of you hanging out in the Locked On Zags Discord community, and remind you to hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. There's a little bell button. You hit that, you get notified every time there is a new show. You'll get notified when we do little posts on the community tab as well. Lots of fun polls and various conversations happening over there. Thanks again, folks. 2 more shows later this week. Looking forward to it already. Thanks again for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.